Yo, this is Jumping Jack Frost, and welcome to the Frost Report. Boom! Hey everyone, welcome along to another edition of the Frost Report. Today we are talking about serious youth violence, we're talking about gangs, and we're talking about county lines. I've got three very special guests that I've chosen specifically because they've been involved in this life in one aspect or another. Joining me today are Sheldon Thomas from Gang Lines, Kendra Houseman from Out of the Shadows, and Junior Smart from the St. Giles Trust. So guys, before we get into it, I'd just like to get a little bit of background on you, on how we got to where we are today. Starting with you, Sheldon.
My early days was, I served 10 years being a gang leader from Brixton during the late 70s and 80s, different time period to the one we're in. We spent most of our time fighting the National Front and racist police officers. That then culminated in us burning Brixton down in 1980 and 1981. And from there, because of the kind of sort of Jamaican element came in the early 80s, we got involved in the drugs trade. And hence, which is the legacy of today, we got involved with that. And during that time period, 9 of my friends were shot dead. I myself was shot at, and the last incident was 1985 in a nightclub in East London, where 4 gunmen came in balaclavas and shot at me, missed, and blew the guy's head off next to me. And that was my way of leaving gang life. So I left. Oh, is it still recording? Yeah. And so I left gangs in 1985, and Bernie Grant and Diane Abbott took me to America to meet up with Jesse Jackson. And that's when I learned, I would say that was the beginning of my transition period of learning about the real Sheldon, because the Sheldon before that was a very angry black guy who hated every white person on planet Earth and got sucked into this whole hatred thing, which kind of mentally, I was not stable. Most days I'd wake up wanting to kill people. It wasn't nice. I wasn't a nice person. I wasn't a nice father. I was a horrible man. I smoked drugs till I couldn't smoke anymore. I was always angry. And there's a scene in the Avengers, the very first Avengers, and Captain America says to the guy who plays the Hulk, he said, we need you to smash. We need you to get angry. And he turned to Captain America and he said, I'm always angry. And my generation of black guys grew up, we were always angry because we were attacked by police officers, attacked by the National Front. We were kidnapped, threatened. There were things, if I was to sit here, we can't go into right now because it's too long. But my background wasn't a very nice background. So when people hear me talk and they hear the kind of voice and think, this guy sounds angry. I'm not angry anymore, but I've lived a life where it wasn't nice. We compared our life to apartheid. And I don't think many people in gangs understand that. They think that, this gang thing that they've come into, that is something started with them in the 90s. It didn't. It started way before that. And just to put a little spin on it before I hand over to Kendra, is that at that same time period, poor whites were discriminated against by middle-class whites. In parts of Liverpool, if you applied for a job and you put a certain postcode on it, the application form wouldn't even be looked at. People don't understand that. So these poor white kids in Liverpool and Manchester and Nottingham all formed gangs just like us, not because they woke up one day and said, I'm going to be a gang member. They were pushed into it because of the way they were treated in society. And I think sometimes people think only black people were treated badly, but we weren't. There were some white people in Liverpool and Manchester who were treated like scum. And people need to understand that. And when people begin to grasp what I'm talking about, then you can see why we're in the mess we're in today. So I know Junior asked me about what my background is, but it's difficult to separate my background from the society that we were living in that time period so that you can understand the context of today.
So I was born in 1980. I was born in a Clapham Common. I was born into Southwest London. And so I brought up in an environment where gangs, I never saw them as gangs, but gangs had taken over our community, and that's what I was born into, and it was very normal to me. And so when I was asked to do certain things, hold weapons and all that stuff, it was almost the norm. People say, oh, was you scared? No, like I was glad when they asked me, because that means I was included. My mum, we lived in poverty. My mum was poor. She had poor mental health. She couldn't hold down a job. And so at 11, 12, I become the breadwinner. And that's how it is. And that happened through exploitation. Boom, move forward. I had my first son very, very young. And I was just drawn into exploitation on a level that no one should be brought into it. But it did feel like the norm, and nobody heard me. Society didn't help me. They punished me. I was criminalized way before I was safeguarded. And now I have Out the Shadows, where I go around educating people to understand gangs and exploitation through the eyes of a female and through the eyes of a child.
So my name's Junior Smart. I would have said, like, different newspapers have covered who I am in different ways. So some say I was involved in gangs. I would have said it was more like a group of friends. And I would say things didn't really lose balance until after my mum died. I got involved in a lot of criminal activity, and then I got sent down in 2001 for 12 years. And in that time, after trying to take my life a few times, I thought I'd try and save it and save as many vulnerable young people that I came across. And that journey first started with the Samaritans. I got trained up as a Samaritan inside prison. I started to teach guys how to read and write in their cells. And then I went on to mentor guys while I was still serving. And then I got given an opportunity within a London-based charity to set up a project called SOS, which is now the largest ex-offender-led project of its type in the UK. In 2008, what we classed back then as record numbers, but I think it was like 52 or 62 young people were murdered on the streets of London that were recorded. I ended up setting up SOS Plus, which goes into schools, colleges, pupil referral units, community centres. And the whole idea of both of these projects is using ex-offenders with lived experience to impart real tools of change. When I think about, like earlier we were talking, if you go in and speak to a doctor and it's any decent standing doctor will say like, oh no, if you've got a specific condition, I want to send you off to a specialist. I want to send you off to somebody who really knows what they're talking about. And that's their specialist area of knowledge. Well, for me and the projects that I developed, it's really about using that specialist knowledge, using that lived experience to really help people make better choices. And the youth is my passion. I've dedicated the last 15 years of my release to making that change. And I am horrified, as I'm sure both of you are, just the numbers of young people getting drawn in and the deaths and the killing. It's not stopping. So that's why I'm here.
We're just going to get straight into it here with the first question. The county lines trade involves the use of 30,000 children across the UK, as the National Crime Agency is aware of. Why do you think this number is increasing?
Well, one, we have to be careful about the deprived community. We need to understand in England, and I'm going to be specific around England because I'm not going to talk from a London point of view. I'm going to talk from a UK point of view. There are lots of poor people in the country who's never committed one single crime. So what we are looking at is a distinct group within that group as to why this particular group is committing crimes. So that's one. The other thing that we need to look at is the family structure. In Britain today, we care more about a 9-to-5 job than actually raising children. So I'll give you an example of that. I did a study, I was part of a study from the London Business School. And they did a study on how many hours or minutes do parents spend with their children in the UK. And they looked across all social factors. It wasn't done on class or color or race or anything like that, or faith groups, right? It was done on a kind of big, wide survey. And the survey found that mums, on average, spend 1 hour a day with their children. If there is a father, and I say if, they spend 34 minutes per day. When you look at the social media now, between 12 and 25, most of these kids spend 9 hours a day on social media. So the question is, how can we stop the exploitation of children into this lifestyle? It's simple. Parenting has to take more control. Now, some people are going to listen to this and say, why are you blaming parents? Well, before they become known to the police or go to school or go to a primary school or go to nursery, they come out of a home. Now, some people will argue that, but what happens if the mum's got issues? That's okay, because no one's not saying that mums are supposed to be perfect. What I'm saying is, why are we not bringing men more to task in helping the mum to raise those children if the man is balanced? Because obviously there is a rise in domestic violence, and has been for about 30 years, actually, way before COVID, because it's never been addressed in this country, by the way. There's been a rise in rapes that's not been addressed in this country. So we know there's a problem with men in general around domestic violence and dealing with rape cases. So I'm not talking about those kind of men being involved in a children's life. What I am saying is, my work has taken me across this country, and I've seen one thing that there's a thread, which is, whenever we look at children involved in county lines or exploitation or grooming, there's a thread that goes through, and it's the absence of a positive male role model, because the male role models they look up to are not the positive ones, are generally the negative guys who are trying to entice them into this lifestyle. So I would say this: if we are to tackle county lines or exploitation, we have to change the way we parent. That's one. Also, the government has to start looking at what are they offering. What vision do they offer for families in this country, in terms of what happens when a kid doesn't want to go to university and just wants to get a job? What happens if the kid wants to get an apprenticeship? Because at the moment, the apprenticeships don't give you a job. The apprenticeships don't pay good money. So obviously, if a drug dealer says to you, a 10-year-old, I will pay you £50 a day, or 11-year-old £50 a day, or a 12-year-old £50, that's more than the money they'll be earning doing an apprenticeship. So the question is, what is the government doing to subside the attraction of money towards young people coming from particular backgrounds? So my answer to that question is simple. The government needs to have vision for children. It doesn't have one, or for families. 2, we need to address the mental health crisis in our country and stop blaming mums as if mums are the problem. We need to also look at the fact that men are not involved in their kids' life as the way they ought to. So that will be my part of my answer.
I think that one of the things that is missing from that question is the role of the female, not just as a mum, but as a female is being exploited within that. And so, and from a personal experience is my mum knew how to parent. My mum had poor mental health. I know you're saying that's a percentage, but hold tight. So my dad was in prison and my mum had poor mental health, and she was just struggling to get from day to day. So she turned a blind eye. Like, I love my mum, but she turned a blind eye when I started bringing money in. Why? Because she had no other choice, because we had nothing. And then the violence that takes place against girls. Here's the thing. The way to move forward within county lines is to understand 2 things. 1, when the children are involved in county lines, it's not always bad. It is bad, but it's not always bad for them. They have some of the best times they have been when they're being exploited by gangs, and nobody wants to hear that. My journey through county lines wasn't awful every day. I wouldn't have been there. Some days I had the best days of my life. It was at the end of it became bad. So I think that we need to understand that We need to take off our blinkers. Yes, children are being exploited. However, the perpetrators are making that attractive to the people. It's not a bad day every day, and that's why they're not walking away. Second, we need to recognize that females can be both perpetrator and victim. They're always a victim because we're always being exploited. But I was a perpetrator and a victim. I was used to recruit and I was recruited. By educating parents about them two things, that your child is enjoying part of it and that your female child can be a perpetrator and a victim, I think is a way to move forward for society.
I would agree with that, but I would say that, and you're 100% right when you talk about perpetrator and victim, because that works both ways in terms of male and females, and you're 100% correct about that.
And female.
Yeah, I totally agree. I just think, for me, there's a lot of blame on women, and I'm getting a bit fed up of it because, for instance, when social services turn up at the door, straight away, they're looking at the woman as a bad mum. They're not even taking into account that there's no father figure.
That's to do with social services as a structure rather than blaming the females. So social services only know how to deal with, like, if anyone's hearing this, but social services are structured to deal with familiar abuse within the home. They don't know how to deal with abuse that's taking place outside the home.
Yeah.
So they rock up and blame the parent, the female, because all the books that they learnt from in university are saying, can the sole caregiver keep the child safe? In deprived areas, it's usually a woman. And so they're not asking the right questions.
But that has to change. I mean, that's the point.
Yeah. But that's why females are getting the blame, is because it's nothing to do with the female. It's nothing to do with me, you, or the gang members.
No.
They haven't changed their policy.
The system hasn't changed.
No.
Right. And I totally accept that. But this is the point. Because the system hasn't changed and it continues, society feel, that's why they don't like social service. You've heard the saying where they come in and say, I don't like social services. The system hasn't changed. And this is what I was speaking to Junior with about earlier. When we're in a society that refuses to change, nothing's going to change. And I just feel until this system, which is what you're talking about, changes, because I'm not actually talking about the employees, I'm talking about the system, then we're not going to change that situation. The question talks about why is the numbers increasing with young people being groomed into this kind of county lines. Number one, we need to actually understand the full picture here. So the full picture is quite simple, and I'm going to use their own figures to tear them down. So according to the Children's Commission, and I'm going to go by that figure, whatever figure I give you, double it, because the Children's Commissioner is commissioned by the government. And anytime they give a figure, it's always downplayed. So we must take that into account. And I'm not having a go at government here. I'm just being an honest person. And I'm going to tell you why, because I did a degree in statistics. So I know how figures are manipulated. So the question is about 30,000. Well, I'm going to tell you that figure is wrong, okay? The fact is they don't know how much kids are involved, not at all. But what they do know is how many kids are known to the Youth Offending Service, which is about 6,560, something like that. But what they have found out is that when they've looked at the figures of kids not known to services, they have found it between 60 and 120,000. So the fact is, because they're estimating the kids not known, and they only have figures of the kids known, because obviously when you get a referral order, it's a statistic you can use. We are missing, if we was to go by their figure, 114,000 kids. Then let's go even one step further. They did another survey where they asked 313,000 children, do you know of a person in a gang? And they all said yes. So it means if they all said yes, guarantee you this, at least one of them or 1 in 2 of those people asked would have been in a gang themselves. That's why they were able to answer yes. So this is why we need to be careful when we look at figures, because the actual figures of young people involved is just an estimate that the government uses. Now, if I was to tell you what Gangsline would say that figure is, I will put the figure at close to 200,000 gang members in this country. Because as I said to Junior, one of the things Gangsline does, we don't just work in London, we work across, and we have been doing that since 1989. Now, granted, I didn't do it in the way I'm doing it now, like Gangsline, St. Giles Trust and all of the other. I didn't do it in that way. I just got on a train and went. So I was able to engage gang members who are not known to the police or the youth offending team. As right now, Junior, and I'm sure Kendra will tell you, they engage gang members who are not known to the services. So it means that actually the police, the NCA, everyone does not actually know the real figure of how much young people are involved and groomed into this lifestyle. So it's really important that we understand that whatever figure you hear the government, double it.
See, like for me, the reason why I think this number's increasing is there's been a cacophony of different things that have been happening all at the same time. So on one hand, the government have consistently taken away services in order to save money. And that has just left families, communities, and I'm not saying that, like Sheldon said absolutely right earlier, there's loads of people going up in deprivation and loads of them go on and they don't commit crime. But what I would say at my level of study is that desperation is usually a result of deprivation. And what happens is the tougher things get, the more likely people are to look at alternative ways of making money. Look at our world, look at our society. Everything on social media, it is have now, pay later society. Like I saw the latest adverts from the sports shop, I won't mention their names, but they're saying that it's time for you to own the street. So up flashed the trainer of £180, which is outside of the reach of most families. Look at how they did the Eat Out to Help Out scheme. I'm sorry, the majority of the families I'm working with, they're not thinking of eating out. But when I raised this stuff, people were saying to me, go get a grip of yourself. You know, I was like, what? Listen, Bentley lost how many jobs? Why isn't there a drive out to help out scheme? You see what I mean? They're ignoring the families that are most in need. And what I think is we're dealing with a situation where we're taking away opportunities from young people. We're systematically stripping away services. Look at mental health. And you only have to talk to law enforcement. You only have to look at the prisons. Most of the people in prisons have got mental health issues. They're ending up in custody. It's the wrong approach to take.
Most of the people in society have mental health
There
problems.
you go, exactly. And this is the problem that we've got. So we're taking away money from services in order for the government to save money, but it's only hitting the same levels of society again and again, the harshest. It's just like what we're seeing is, and if you see what's going on, my biggest challenge now working with young people is to stop them getting criminalized. Because once you get criminalized, then hey, you can't use your voice. You can't make change. You know, it's like the way I see everything that they fling at these young people is, no, get the trainers, don't vote. You can be an Instagram star. You don't actually have to work at anything, but you can have a name and a reputation. And if you see the damage that it's causing to our young people, it's absolutely unreal. And I agree completely with what the guests have said so far, because in the absence of like a firm mother, what can you say? People are just going to go adrift.
I back everything that you just said there in the fact of what I see is there was a big cut of funding about 15 years ago. That's when youth clubs started to deplete and stuff like that. So what we've got is the babies had babies and that got ignored. Support for single parents, teenage single parents 15, 16 years ago just disappeared. You could no longer get housing. You could no longer support yourself. And so what I think we're seeing is a growth of the children that were born within that exploitation, within them areas anyway. And now they've got even less. And their parents have got mental health. They've got trauma from everything they've witnessed. And so now it's just one big old mess.
So are drug traffickers who exploit children committing offences against children, and should all parts of the chain of command be charged, if caught, as abusers of children? What are your thoughts on this?
So the government put out a little scheme quite recently, and they targeted, I'm not saying they targeted middle-class white people, but they did. And they targeted people, like bars and stuff like that, and they done something to basically say, if you take cocaine, then you are harming a child in wherever cocaine comes from. Very similar to the burger box, where they put it in chicken boxes to be quite racist. But they've done the same thing. And so I spoke to the people around developing that, and I was quite shocked. So I said, so tell me what, you think it's okay to put that out there and tell them that they're harming children in another country, but what about the children they're buying from? And this is my point. Most people that buy drugs are buying them from children, okay? And I was a child that delivered drugs. So how can you justify buying drugs from a child and not be charged with neglect and child abuse?
I can answer that.
Yeah.
Because when you're dealing with middle-class whites, they are a law unto themselves.
Anyone who buys cocaine, but I'm just saying that's what it was targeted at.
But you see this, what you're talking about here? The reason what I've noticed, there's a law for the rich and a law for the poor. And what I've realized is, I'm just going to go slightly off the point here. There was a young girl that was kidnapped some decades ago called Madeline, okay? Do you remember that incident? Young girl. They were on holiday, the doctors, both the parents.
Madeline
doctors,
McCann.
Yes.
Madeline McCann, thank you, because I didn't remember the name, sorry. And she was taken from a hotel. Now, let me tell you something. Now, some people are going to get upset here. If that was a poor white family whose child was taken, the minute the mum landed on English soil, she would have been arrested for neglect.
Absolutely.
And what we are in a society where middle-class whites go on holiday, went drinking, didn't see the hotel room, child goes missing, and they come back almost to a hero's welcome with £12 million given to them for funding to thingy. How much of us in this room has received £12 million in the time? Look at the work that you do, Junior, Kendra. Let's say the three of us worked in the same place. Right, let's have a look at that. So the three of us, we would have engaged with at least, because me on my own, I've engaged over 8,000 children, right? So with you guys, most probably another 30,000, right? So let's say 30,000. Between the three of us, we would not be given £12 million to further that work. And I'm just saying, how can we have a situation where middle-class people are buying drugs from children who are from a particular background, but yet we're not looking at what the supply and demand?
No, it's worse than that. This is the worst bit, right? So we talk about all drug traffickers, like everyone should be thing. This is the worst bit, yeah? The child will then be criminalised if they ever speak out about their exploitation. So I could buy drugs from a child. I could report that. That child will be criminalised for selling drugs to the adult. But they will get a more charge. More will happen to the child that sold the drugs than
the person who bought it.
That's why it needs to be on every level.
Children and vulnerable people using county lines activity are often from deprived areas. How can community awareness be raised to support young people at risk? And in turn, how can the community be protected from the threat of violence and intimidation? What are your thoughts on this?
I personally think that if you've got the brain capacity to get your money out of the bank and go buy yourself a rock, then you know that you shouldn't be buying it from a child. That's my personal opinion. On the end, if there was somebody buying drugs from a child, they would be looked upon in a different way. So why is it different if it's a Saturday night? Oh, it's just a Saturday night. No, bruv, you're abusing a child. Buying drugs from a child makes you a child abuser. You should not be able to have children. Their children should be investigated. Let's take it that level, mate.
As Kendra quite rightly pointed out, which normal person doesn't know buying drugs from a child is not wrong? Come
I agree.
On. Let's not try and make it sound like they don't know. Listen, we're in a class system, and the class system is based on something that's been going for over 500 years, going back to Elizabeth I, okay? You've got to go back and understand that I did history A-level, and I'm telling you, this country has centuries of discriminating against the poor consistently. So this is what they do. A person from a middle-class white or rich person back then could commit the same crime as a person from the poor white, and guarantee you that they will find a way to get that person off, but the person from the poorer background, they will find a way to criminalize. That's not change in this country. Let's stop pretending that middle-class people don't know what they are doing.
I think it's a joke. I can't, honestly, I'm not being funny. I like walking around here, like we're in a nice upper-class area. I can see some of them being quite discerning. Yeah, I want free-range chicken. I want free-range eggs. I can't see them being too discerning about what they're going to snort up their nose on a Friday or Saturday night. I honestly think that is a joke idea cooked up by someone who doesn't really know the reality. And it's like what they talk about with knife crime. Oh, yeah, well, if we just increased the sentence for knife carrying, I'm telling you now, you could put £100 and 100 years on carrying a knife tomorrow, and knife carrying would not cease. Because unless you address the needs, the underlying needs, and let's be honest, I think with county lines, what it is, people always like to talk about it's a business model, but if there's not
No
a
demand, there's no supply.
there's no supply. But also, if there's no needs for the young people to make money, then there's no...
We could go one step further, which you just touched on, which is if we could find a way where there's no need to make that money because they've got a system that allows them to make it the right way. Now, here's the problem. Middle-class whites buy the drugs, okay? I'm not saying they buy a majority of them. I'm just saying they buy the drugs.
We're just saying.
Now, who brings in the drugs? White gangsters. Now, how do I know this? I was a part of it. Not me personally, but the gang in my time period. I'm going to go back to the 18, okay? I'm going to go back to Curtis Warren. I'm going to go back to back then. They were bringing in the drugs, not the black guys, not the little poor white kid from Salford or Canning Town. These not middle class, these white gangsters who are all over 37 years old, they're not young kids, organized criminal networks. These guys were bringing in the drug supply and they weren't doing the distribution. They were then getting the gang members to do the distribution. Now watch this. How comes that's not under control? Because the question then becomes, these street gangs can't bring drugs in because they haven't got the business mechanism, okay? We don't have the business mechanism. So we've got a battle here. We've got the people who bring the drugs in. Yeah. No one's concentrating on them. And we've got the people who buy the drugs. No one's concentrating on them. So we're all concentrating on a bunch of school kids, 15, 16, 17-year-old. Now, obviously, now the age is younger. It's 12 and 11 and 10. We're concentrating on them. Let's lock them one up, not realizing, actually, what about the guy that's bringing it in through Holland? It's coming through Mallorca, then Holland, then down here. It depends on which way. They are the ones who are bringing in the drugs. Now, I know Curtis Warren is locked up, which is all good. But as that kind of empire stopped? No. So the question is, why are we in this country focusing on a bunch of children whose Junior's quite rightly said, who there is a need for them to go out. Why? Mum's not well. Dad's not around. Unemployment's high. There's no vision for the young person to leave school and get a decent job. Why should the kid doesn't want to go to university? I've got several kids on my book who do not want to go to university. They just want to earn money.
You've got to think about the just because of the child protection point of view, okay? These children don't choose. So on a Saturday night, I was forced to work more hours. Like it was just said, there wasn't a conversation. I'm telling you now, between the ages of 11 to 15, any drugs that were sold on a Saturday and a Friday night were to adults, white adults mostly, that looked in my face. I looked very young and they never cared. And so should everyone be charged? Yeah, the people you're talking about should be charged. Do you know who shouldn't be charged? The children. Their criminalisation goes before the safeguarding. That's why children like Jade and Moody are dead.
And that's the real reality.
Us ignoring things.
But do you know why they're ignoring it, though? It's because most of them are friends with the people who buy drugs. And I'm going to say this, and this is going to sound really controversial. A lot of the people in the ports and the police are on the take from these organised criminals. Because these organised criminals can pay you 100 grand in one bag. Say, yo, turn a blind eye. Or let them know if there's an investigation going on. It's
all right if our children dying on our streets of London, the press doesn't stop, but children are dead and the news just keeps running.
And for the ones who are listening out there, it may sound like we're attacking the system. What you have to understand, the three of us here have got insight that you may not understand because you're listening to the wrong people all the time. And the insight we're giving you is we're not angry. We're not attacking no one. We're just telling you the facts. I lived that life. Kendra's lived it. And Junior's lived it. We've lived it in our different time periods. But what we've realized is what the work that we're doing has focused us in the wrong direction. That's what we have noticed. That's what we're agreeing on. And we have to understand, the listeners need to understand, you need to stop listening to people who are telling you that these kids are the problem.
So it's a widely known fact that cuckooing is used by gangs to exploit vulnerable people into county lines activity. Should more funding be put in place to protect vulnerable people who live alone? And also, should vulnerable people then be housed in communities which are deemed safer and less at risk of County Lines activity?
Who knows? Because it changes all the time. I mean, if you listen to Kent, they say there is no gang problem in Kent and they've got no cuckooing or anything like that. So that's just stupidness. So this is what they're saying, right? That cuckooing is used, and should there be more funding for vulnerable people? Once again, the voice of the child is lost. No, there should be more funding into helping children that are involved in cuckooing. Yes, it is sad that there's vulnerable families and of individuals, and there should be funding to support them. But we're moving far, far away from that. You know, when you're cuckooing in a dress, and I've been part of that process, it doesn't really matter who's in the house. It could be a family if it really, really wanted to go down that way. And so there needs to be more work done. I'll give you an example. I've just come from Margate to London, and I had to use a ticket to get out the train station. Once I get into Ashford, I can then go anywhere and there'll be no ticket inspectors. So I, as a young person, can operate from anywhere. So we're looking too big. It's not so much about supporting the vulnerable people. We've got to look back at the kids. It has to be back on the children that are doing the cuckooing.
Well, let's look at it from two sides. The side that Kendra's just explained is quite right, but I'm going to look at it on the other side. When they say vulnerable, they're talking about mainly vulnerable male white adults who have learning difficulties. Because I've been involved in many of these trap houses up and down. I know they use the word cuckooing, but I don't like to use that word. So it's, for those who don't understand, it's trap house or bando. It's where the drugs are made, or sometimes weapons stored, or monies or cash are stored. But what happens is the gang members leave from wherever. So just use London, Birmingham, Manchester, because there's 4 cities that control the whole of the UK when it comes to county lines: Liverpool, Manchester, Birmingham and London. London takes up most. I just need you to understand that. Okay, Nottingham does come into it a little bit, but not as much as those 4 major cities.
Is it fair to say that each of these gangs from each of these areas operate in a different way?
Yes, they operate slightly different, but almost in the same way as well. Yeah. So let me explain a little bit. So what they will do is, so London gangs, they would leave and try to find an area. They will not try, they will identify an area, then identify a house or a person living in that house. So that person could be a nitty. So that means a nitty is somebody that is hooked on crack cocaine, or the person has an alcohol problem, or the person has learning difficulties. Now, let me explain. Many years ago, it will be a woman's house. But what the gangs from London recognise is that a lot of the women had social services involved in their life. So it meant that there's a chance social service could turn up and things could get really sticky.
And make the property hot.
Yes, right. So, and what they then decided to do, the gangs from London and Birmingham, well, all of them, they decided we're going to find men who, because there's not a lot of services for men. So these guys realized when you went over 21, there's no service for you. If you've got learning difficulties, you're left on your own. If you've got mental health, you've got alcohol problem, or you're a nitty, you're left on your own. So the gang members realize if we target men who have got these situations, these problems, then they're less likely to have social services involved. So people need to understand. So I would say this, to answer that particular question, I would say that we do need services to help those men. Of course, Kendra's right. At the center of our discussion here is kids. But we also need to look at some of the people who are affected by it. And these men have got learning difficulties. These men have got alcohol problem. They shouldn't be criminalized because they've been taken advantage of. And just because they're 29 or 32 doesn't make a difference. We are in a world where we've got to understand that when a person is being taken advantage of, it doesn't just happen to women, doesn't happen just a 10-year-old or 11-year-old. It can still happen to a guy that is 31, but he's got learning difficulties.
This is where females come back into it. So what I've seen an increase of is females being used to draw them men in via social media. So I've got young girls that are used to almost sell themselves to these vulnerable adult males, and that's how they're getting into the house. And then that female's just passed on to the next job. And so I'll bring you back to my first ever point, is the females often missed in their role because the role is not seen as significant as it is. But I've seen that, and that is usually the role of female, to draw these older males in.
I couldn't agree on it more. So to answer the question is, those men, those women, those children, all should be treated in the same way, because society now has got to start looking at men in a different way, because there are no services for these guys. There's a situation with that a young man. He was 47 years old. A gang from North London. I don't know which gang it was, but it's from North London. They identified him, groomed him, and paid his rent. They didn't see, in the old days, there was a lot of violence. So these guys would beat people up in the homes, that kind of stuff. Now they don't do that. These gang members will give you money, pay your rent. So if you've got an alcohol problem, they'll supply your alcohol. If you've got a drugs problem, they'll supply that. So I think people need to understand they're being taken advantage of as well. So we do need to look into
And
that.
there is a mechanism there, because them males you're talking about will never be put through the national referral mechanism. They never will, because a frontline worker has to do that. The same way the kids won't, because it's a frontline worker usually. And so if all of them people that were cuckoos were put through the mechanism, we would then have a true number of victims of exploitation.
Could you just quickly explain what the national referral mechanism is?
It's in place it depends, we're talking about children and adults. I can explain it for children. So it's in place that to identify that if a child is trafficked or moved around the country or exploitation in that way, it's there to put it in place to look at why that happened and to put support around it. However, it's not used in the way, like many things for children, it's not used in the right way. So if a 15-year-old boy is arrested in a minute at Paddington Station with £7,000 worth of heroin, first he'll be arrested, then he'll be charged, and then they will look at it. It's not used in the right way.
I don't know about both of you, but I'm sure you both agree with me. Aren't you tired of stuff that just don't work?
Yeah.
Just imagine, this is how the system's currently working. So I'm coming to the system and I'm saying, look, I've got problems paying my rent. I've got a drug addiction. I've got an alcohol problem. I'm in debt. I've got mental health issues or emotional well-being issues. And the system basically saying, I know the solution for you. Custody, prison. That's what it's saying over and over and over again. And here's what I saw firsthand. I saw it in prison myself, is container after container of broken, hurt, distraught, upset, traumatized people put into a traumatized environment. How many people do we know that within our services that suffer from, adverse childhood experiences, yet we're putting them in custody, which is a place of more trauma, more victimization, more violence. And then they're coming out, going back to the same area with the same situation and no support, except now they got a criminal record.
40% of gang members in the UK witnessed or grew up in a house of domestic violence. Remember what I said about stats. Most probably you can double that, but let's just go by their figure. 40%. That is what I'm talking about. And again, we have to ask ourselves, why is it that we don't address domestic violence? Because you've got to understand this, right? I know people want to blame COVID. I don't, because me and my wife have been talking about domestic violence from I don't know how long, right? Now, as far as I'm concerned, there's only one I can put in. People may not like what I'm going to say here, but I believe the reason why we don't address domestic violence is because most of the people who sit in the courts in these judgmental positions are men, white middle-aged men in their late 60s, who are so far removed from reality because they don't understand. First and foremost, we had several women in our cases who refused to go forward because they feel that they're going to be made or persecuted or made to feel they were at fault. Let me give you an example of a live situation that happened a few years ago of a girl. She was gang raped, okay, by a gang. They filmed it, put it on Facebook. She only found out about it because her friend was on Facebook, saw it, and screamed down the phone and said, you're on Facebook and whatever. I won't go into the details of that. But she got somehow the police convinced her to press charges. So she pressed charges. She went to court. This happened. Feel free to look it up, guys. And this is what the judge said to her. Because you add alcohol, you're not a credible witness. I was so hurt. And people need to understand this is what women go through all the time. Every single case you hear about, every time you hear about a woman who's gone through domestic violence, it's they are told, they're almost blamed for it. Blamed. This is a girl. You know what she said to me? Don't ever make me, I don't want to know. Mm-hmm. Another girl on Frampton, I'm going to name the estate, I'm not afraid. Frampton Estate in Hackney. The girl was dragged by 6 gang members on the estate in broad daylight. She was begging for help. 2 women in their 40s walked past her. When the police asked them, why did you walk past her and not help her? They said it was nothing to do with us. She was raped by those guys. Please don't tell me that we're getting domestic violence sorted out in this country, gang rape or rape. Women, I'm going to tell you this, and some people are not going to like this. This is my belief. I personally believe women are treated like second-class citizens. That's my personal opinion.
From domestic abuse, right? So for me personally, I come from a gang background, because that's what we're talking about. I come background and I had children. When I had my son, okay, they come to me at the hospital and said, you can't keep him because if you do, he'll never achieve anything. I was just had a baby. Nobody asked me how I got pregnant. Nobody asked me who the baby father was. Nobody cared, okay? All they cared about was me being a number in the system. Fast forward, all my adverse child death events meant that I got into a relationship with DV. When I reported that DV, and I kept saying I was going to do it, and I didn't. When I reported it, they come to my house, not his, and they said to me, can you keep your children safe? Because if you can't, we're going to have to put you up to CP. Why are you not going asking him why didn't he stop doing what he's doing? And that's the norm. So another reason why people don't speak out about domestic abuse is that I will get the blame and I will be asked if I can keep my child safe. The same way if I'm a teenage mum and I get pregnant, they're going to ask me, what am I going to do? And we are treated like second-class citizens. And if you're a young mum, it's even worse.
Kids have been failed and killed by their involvement in county lines and drug-related activity. Why aren't the police, an education system, children's services stopping this? Is it due to lack of funding, ignorance, or is it just turning a blind to over 30,000 children? In some cases, we could say more. We just don't know. What are your thoughts on this? Because to me, it's mind-blowing.
The system's failing because it's run by men and they don't know what it's like to be held down and raped while man after man runs a train through you. They don't know what it's like to not let your daughter go out to play because you know what it feels like to be that. They don't know what it's like a male to be able to touch me and not be held accountable. They don't know what it's like to walk through the school playground and the boys can grab up your skirt and very little was done back in the day. When I was younger, feel-ups in the playground was a thing. Feel-ups on the estate. You couldn't do nothing to stop them.
I mean, the sad part about what you're describing is just the other day, they're now talking about, oh, we need to educate.
I know.
Well, actually, you're 50 years too late.
Way too late.
Because now it's entrenched. A boy punching up a girl is norm. A boy raping a girl, norm. A boy forcing sex on a girl, norm. A mum getting beaten up by her son, norm.
Yeah, but
People don't understand the world that women live in because I've got 3 girls and you've got a daughter. Look, you're a woman as well. And people need to understand. This is what I've noticed. You're talking, I'm listening. Guarantee if I was a judge, not interested.
And this is real case that happened. So a woman got raped and they used her knickers. They held up her frilly thong as evidence. And they said, young lady, if you wasn't going there for sex, then why was you wearing these? It's the same way when young girls are going out and being with gangs. I say, why does she keep going back? Why does she put herself there? No, why don't they stop fucking raping us?
The whole language, everything.
If you look at child sexual exploitation, you've got 4 models: peer, befriending, party, and boyfriend model. The government have called it the boyfriend model. And so they say things like, oh, we're really worried. Jessica's 14 and her 21-year-old boyfriend's picking her up. Shush. Talk about a 21 abuser picking her up. We've even got a model that's a Port CSE that's called the boyfriend model.
You need to understand where this is real coming from. This is coming from the 3 of us here. We're on the front line, right? We may be consultants, right? Where we can give advice to governments and all different organizations, but we're actually on the front line. We actually go out and do this work. Kendra's actually been living it. Junior goes out and does this work. We see this every single day. So what you're hearing isn't a book. This is us speaking from our heart. And I don't want you to be offended. I want you to listen, especially coming from Kendra, because I'm not a female. And I'm not going to try and act like one. What I am going to do is I'm going to defend. And I understand what it means because I know my daughter comes and tells me, oh, yeah, this man tried to put his hand. This man tried to say this and that. And let me just bring it home to you. I have first-hand account of police men making sexual remarks to police women. Please don't tell me that you want to deal with gangs when you've got policemen making sexual remarks to police women, and the women don't say anything because they want to keep their job. Why? Because the world that they are in is a world of men, a men-dominated employment situation. So when we're speaking from the heart. Please understand that.
I honestly think we got a real big problem, even in the language. So when I heard that lady, sadly, who got murdered, the first thing I said out loud was, "What was she doing walking through the park at 3:00 in the morning?" In my defense, and I checked myself like, wow.
I was born on that common, you know. I was born there. Why can't I walk through there?
The first thing in my head was that, doesn't she know what it's like? Doesn't she know it's unsafe? But actually, it's the wrong, even in the language, because at the end of the day, women should be entitled to do whatever they want and not feel threatened. And I feel ashamed. I feel absolutely ashamed that the number of men that I know that almost like if they got Tourette's, they have to sort of say, it's not all men. Do you remember like with the Black Lives Matter, they like to say all lives matter. It's like they have to say something.
Because one of your tweets said, and somebody said that it's not all men.
I know. It's crazy. We have to let go of that and actually be real with us. How, if we can't admit that there's ever a problem, how can we ever expect change?
So let me ask you this. Someone comes to you and they tell you they've been involved in gang-related activity and they want out. They're done. What do? How can their families be protected? And as they are so far down the chain, access to the witness protection program might not be an option for them. What do?
My simple answer is that it all depends on which children are involved. And unfortunately, most of the kids involved are from poor white backgrounds. Some are from black backgrounds. And I'm going to be real with you. The only time we heard the word gangs was when Reece Jones was killed, because he's a white kid from a nice background and got caught in a crossfire between the Norris Green gang and the Croxteth gang. And all of a sudden, gangs was on the agenda. And what happens when you're dealing with this kind of level of crime always comes down to a class situation. Suddenly they can't find the money. Suddenly there's no money. Suddenly that the police are experts on something they know nothing about. Suddenly the school don't get the right information. So the kid goes missing from day one. The school doesn't respond until day 3. And by the time day 4 comes into it, the kid's already sucked into whatever he's sucked into. There isn't a one fixed answer to that. But I would say this. We're in a situation where people are listening to the wrong people. And unfortunately, if you had Kendra in the room advising the police or the school, they wouldn't listen. They would have Kendra in the room because it makes them feel good. Then there's Junior. Junior's black. They feel good because they've got the black guy in the room, and they feel good because, we've got Junior here, and myself, Sheldon. So the point, what I'm saying is this. I've noticed in this situation that the people advising them often do not know what they're talking about, never lived it, never come from that environment. So they read a book and suddenly they're the experts on county lines, gangs, and all of that. The fact is this, if Boris wants to find money, he can, but he doesn't want to find money. What he wants to do is give people, the voters, the impression that he's managing the situation so that he can get voted back in. The sad part about it is local communities are not holding him to task. We should be holding the government to task in better ways, but we don't. What we do, we go to community meetings and scream, but we don't come out of that community meeting with a positive approach. And because we don't come out, we are not holding the government to account. So, for instance, at this moment in time, we've got terrorism as a big thing in the UK. But the biggest problem in the UK isn't terrorism, it's gang violence. But yet gang violence does not get the same amount of money and input into what terrorism. Now, if we was to put a figure in it, and I'm just going to show you, in 2017, the terrorism murder rate throughout the whole world was 26,000 people died from terrorism. I'm just going to name one country. In the same year, in Mexico, 33,000 people died of gang-related murder. So the question then becomes, how is it terrorism is so important in the UK when it actually causes less death rates than actual gang-related violence? When we look at county lines, we've got to understand that county line comes down to who is actually involved in county lines? What are the age group? Are they coming from a particular background? So, for instance, the girl in the park 3 years ago in Romford who was killed, she was from a middle-class background. All of a sudden, gangs is a big problem. I'm going to tell you the amount of black girls that have been killed by gangs that never made front page. I'm going to tell you the amount of young white kids have been killed that's never made front page because they're not from a particular background. So when we ask that particular question there about, is it ignorance? Yes. Is it lack of funding? Yes. Is it also lack of having the right people in the room? Yes. Is it also a lack of not wanting to have the right people in the room? Yes. All of the above. We're going to always struggle in this arena to tackling county lines because the police don't understand the culture. The culture of gang violence can only be understood if you've lived it. You cannot read this book. You only have knowledge on gangs when you've lived it because you can see through the eyes because you've gone through it. I can talk about being mentally unstable because I was. I can talk about carrying weapons because I did. I can talk about hurting people because I did. I can't talk about grooming because in my days it was different. We didn't groom children, but Kendra can talk about grooming. Junior can talk. Maybe Junior didn't get involved in grooming, but he can talk about it because he's a later generation to me. But what I'm saying is, all three of us have lived this life. So how can you go to people who have never lived it? Why would you go to somebody, an ear person who does ears, specializes in ears when you've got an eye problem?
I tell you what I want to do as a counterbalance, though, is to just speak on behalf of that. So I have done a lot of work up and down the country. And what I have come across is a lot of professionals. I want to take my hat off to any frontline worker who's out there, social worker, police. Yes, I want to take my hat off to the police. They're human beings. They're working in challenging circumstances. What I see when I'm working up and down the country is a lot of goodwill. People, if anything, people are asking me for the answers. But here's the problem. The systems and the frameworks that they're working in, they are dated and they are behind. And even if you look at the police, at the police work, no officer gets a high five or gets a promotion for building better community relations. They don't want to hear about that. They only want to hear about the number of people that you've locked up, people that have arrested. When we've been doing the work in the custody suites, here's the gap. We've been doing the work in the custody suites. The people that are coming in, they are by and large crying out for help. There is a massive disconnect. I think there's so much misinformation, miscommunication, lies, perpetrated lies that send out a message that all of the time I've been doing this work, I've never come across someone in prison that's lazy, who wants to be in prison, that wants to get sent down. I've never come across no young individual that hasn't been bright or intelligent. And often they are caught out in a situation that's way beyond their control. And then they're working in a system that's just there to send them down. And for the thousands of social workers I've come across, they'll come to me, they'll ask me for advice, but then in reality, when I'm checking in with them 6 months later, they'll say, I hear what you're saying, Jay, but I just don't have the time. I've got 10 clients to see in a day. When am I supposed to actually sit down and get to know this kid? And that's what I mean. The frameworks are dated. No wonder parents are being looked at as agents of their children going off the rails. When what I come across when I speak to parents, they've been going to services saying, help me, I need your help. And they've largely felt either bounced around by different services or ignored.
Oh, well, you heard the latest one. The only time that they will help your child is if your child has actually been arrested. Do not listen to any of these people who say to you they want to help. They don't. This is what happens. When you want your help for your child, they will tell you, has your child been arrested? Have you got a case reference? Oh, I'm sorry, we can't help you. See, this is the problem. See, Gangs Line, we don't work like that. And I'm sure St. Giles Trust don't work like that, yeah? And I'm sure Kendra don't work like that. But our hands are tied because the minute we get a contract from these, I call them monsters, okay? These monsters, they call themselves statutory agencies. They then try to tell you, oh, you can't work with the external. So for instance, I wanted to work with all of the gangs. So for instance, rather than work with one gang member, I said I'd work with all 27, okay? Oh no, you haven't got a referral for 27. You've only got a referral for one. So basically what they're saying is if you want help with your child has to be criminalized first before you get any help. That's the kind of statutory agencies we're under. And it goes back to the point of what Junior's saying. We're not talking about individual staff here. Please don't get that wrong. We're talking that the system that they operate by is flawed. Please do not take this personal. We're not talking about individual staff. We're talking the framework these people operate has made it such that parents have to wait for their child to be victims or become criminalized before they get any help.
So I'd really like to know, is part of the answer to this growing problem enforcing compulsory education and after-school activities? Will this keep our children safe? Because we all know the funding has been cut dramatically over the past, say, 10 years. It's been dramatically cut. So is this the answer?
In Kent, I'm just going to use Kent as an example. I've got a boy and he says to me, Miss, I'm involved in gangs. I'm going to be killed, The chances of that child being moved out of the area are 0. And the chance of that family being moved out of the area are pretty poor. So riddle me this. Why am I going to tell a boy to tell me about his involvement in gang activity when I know I can't protect him?
I don't think I need to add any more.
Oh, okay.
We can't help these gang members. We're third sector organizations, okay? And we don't have the kind of capacity or the power to do that. And what the situation is, as Kendra quite rightly said, because there's a shortage of housing, on top of a shortage of housing, lack of understanding from local authority and from the housing, and a need for them to understand the seriousness of what the son or daughter's involved in.
Wait a second, though. Can we bring some positive? From the heart, innit? What I want any young person, any individual, for any reason, I want you to know that there is help and there is support out there in some form if you look hard enough for it. There's two, in my experience, there's two realities to this. Firstly, it's never going to be as easy as what you think it is. But the second thing is never going to be outright as hard as what you think it is. What this is about using the resources that you have at your disposal. Your mobile phone, most of us can Google services and start with the gang sign, start with SOS Project, start with out of the shadows. And that's a starting point. As I know for a fact on your website, Sheldon, you've got advice. On St. Giles's website, they've got advice. Out of the shadows, you've got advice. That's the starting point. And then one of the things that we're saying to every young person is find at least 3 adults that you can talk to and you can trust. I don't mean 3 people in your peer group that are just yes men and yes girls, just saying yes to whatever you got to say. I'm talking about talking to people that honestly and truthfully, like if you wanted to have those kind of ouch conversations like Sheldon had an ouch conversation with me earlier, made me think, all right, yeah, okay, there's things I'm not doing right here. That's what I'm saying. You need to speak to those sort of people. And then the third thing is be persistent. So you try the first time, you might not get anywhere, try again and keep trying. Because I want you to know that there are services out there. They are sporadic. They're not always as good as the people in this room are. Of course, I'm going to say that because I know these individuals quite well. But I will say there are people out there that care about you. And another thing that a lot of young people tell me is they think that they're the only ones going through this situation. The same thing I speak to with the parents. They feel they're the only ones going through this. They feel, my gosh, they're tired. They're tired of being judged. They're tired of having those arguments where you end up feeling exhausted. But I can honestly tell you that that nothing is ever wasted. Stick at it and stick with it. Because the thing is, my mum, she never got to see the son that she deserved, yeah? But I'll tell you this for 100%, most of the times when I'm talking to the young people, I'm reciting the stuff that she said. Here's what I want you to know, like, you got to stick at it, you got to be persistent. And there are services and there are people out there that care about you. You've just got to find them and you've got to go for it. And yeah, that might mean getting a few closed doors, but I want you to have that hope. Because when people have found the services that have been able to help them or the individuals that they've been able to help them, no mountain has been unscalable, no problem has been... There hasn't been one young person that said to me something that shocked me and said, oh, wow, like that's something that's completely out of my reach.
I would agree with Junior. Be persistent. Believe in yourself. If you really want to get out of this life, he's right. You're going to get a couple of knockbacks. You're going to move forward as well. I would say this. He's named 3 organisations. There are some others. There's not a lot. And this is where I may disagree with Junior, but Junior is right. Be persistent. Junior's right again. Don't speak to your brethren. Your brethren ain't going to know what and what. He's just going to sit down there and sit down, yeah. And that's not good enough. You need somebody that's going to give you a critical sit-down, insight debate on how you can move this, change this lifestyle, yeah?
We're going to end with me because everything good finishes with a woman. The truth is this, that the three people sitting here talking now have been through different levels of exploitation, gangs, whatever, and we've come out and we're here and we're talking. From my point of view, because I was exploited at such a young age, the truth is this, be careful who you speak to, including if it is your brethren, but also professionals. Professionals, if you're listening, tell children the truth and be transparent that if they say something, they could be held accountable. If we're all open and accountable, then things will move forward. Me, I was saved by my son. Giving birth to my son made me realise what real love looks like and unconditional love feels like. So that's what you need to do this, to leave this, to get better, to make this world better. We just got to start showing some love.
Yo, everyone. So that's another edition of the Frost Report. I'd like to thank Kendra, Junior and Sheldon for coming down today, sharing their experiences, sharing their knowledge. That is invaluable. For anyone out there involved in county lines or gang activity, I hope you guys got something out of it. Parents listening, I hope you got something out of it. It was such an insight and we are really grateful for you guys for coming down today. Thank you so much. Next month, we got the legend OG Ice-T. We will be back on video and I thank you all for joining me again for such a wonderful, insightful episode. Peace until next month.
I get high of your memory.